Welcome back, everyone. I'm Captchz. Thanks for joining me again today. We are officially on episode 4 for Miss Marvel, and it was a really great episode, and I was very surprised of who they actually brought in and what they did to the episode. Really just good episode. I think it's by far one of my favorites so far. Before we begin, I do want to say thanks to all the viewers that have been watching the videos. If you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, and share on this video. It'll definitely help out my channel. Other than that, let's go ahead and dive right in from the beginning. In the beginning of the episode, Kamala finally arrives to Karachi with her mother, and they have this very funny clip on the plane where Kamala is still grounded because of what happened at her brother's wedding. And it's just like nice little back and forth with the mom and her. And it's funny because there's actually somebody sitting in the middle of them, so they kind of separated. But also, apparently Kamala hasn't talked the whole plane ride through except to order more Canada Dry, which was really funny. So they arrive in Karachi, and Kamala's cousins are there, and the grandma, and that's all that we've seen for who's waiting for her at the airport. But in the comic books, it's actually just Kamala that arrives to Karachi by herself without her mother. And she needed some time alone because after the events of Civil War Part 2, she needed some time to kind of figure out who she was and, what it meant to be Miss Marvel, and to kind of also ground herself with her heritage. So in the comics, she does arrive in the airport, but it seems by the panels there's like a lot more people there to welcome her, like a bunch more family. In the Disney Plus show, like I said, it's just her cousins and the grandma that pick them up, and they end up just going straight home right after they meet everybody. And they get to the house, and right when Kamala gets out of the car, she's like, has the place always been this big? And the mother was like, yes. And so, one of those things where we're kids, we don't see the full spectrum of things sometime. And, when you see it later or later on in life, when you get a little bit older, it just seems like, wow, like this is where like I was, or where I kind of grew up. And it was like, yeah, definitely it was. But in the comics, it's actually a little bit different. They give a little bit more backstory. So that whole housing unit or building that they live in the comics is actually where the grandma first moved in. And then, once, they had kids, and, the aunts and uncles, they all started to move into that complex. And then when their kids, had kids, they also moved into the complex. And so pretty much in the comic books, like just the whole family tree of Kamala, just everybody just ended up living in this complex. And it's pretty much just like almost like a throne to them. Like nobody else lives there, and it's just a big house with all the family members, everything like that. So back to the Disney Plus, Kamala arrives. They go inside, her and the grandmother. They do have a small conversation of a little bit about the bangle, and you have to learn what it is, and the grandma's fully aware of what the bangle stands for, and like sort of a little bit of the background. Not as similar to the comics. In the first couple panels, Kamala does talk to the grandma, and she's pretty much just welcoming her back, and like showing her the room that she's staying in. And the room in the comics that she stays in is actually Kamala's mother's room, and that's where she would be studying for her exams, everything like that. And Kamala's like, oh wow, like I didn't know that. So later on in the Disney Plus show, Kamala, goes to sleep that first day that they arrive. The next morning, she gets awoken by her cousins, and her cousins are still kind of teasing her a little bit because she hasn't really been in Pakistan really ever since she was a little girl. And so a lot of the stuff that she's used to in America, it's totally different, obviously, in Pakistan. So her cousins are teasing her a little bit, but they end up going to lunch. and like they have a whole afternoon of activities, but first we got to go eat on this like pier pretty much. So they go eat, and Kamala is dressed in jeans, so they aren't able to eat inside, which is kind of funny. She just didn't bring the proper clothing that she thought she was going to need to wear, which doesn't make sense because you would think that the mother would know how to dress in Pakistan, but whatever. So later on, she's pretty much sightseeing with her cousins through the town. They're doing a bunch of tourist stuff. Kamala's buying an outfit that kind of fits, the culture, sunglasses, things like that. But ultimately, she wants to go and see the train station. That's the whole purpose that they're there in the first place, is because Kamala had this vision in the last episode of the Karachi train that her grandmother was on, and also her great-grandmother, which is Aisha. So she does want to go and see the train station. So the cousins are like, well, we're going to go have coffee with some friends, so just go and do your own thing and try to be safe. So Kamala ends up wandering off. She finally finds the train station, and they have this portrait in the background of like Ant-Man, and if you've seen it, and it's kind of nice to pause it because it's like Karachi / Avengers Part 4 or something like that on the wall. So I'm wondering if they have like their own type of comics, or they have their own type of art in Karachi based off the Avengers. So the Avengers are known in Karachi for the most part. Pretty much around the world they know of people with superhuman powers. So while she's at the train station, we finally get to see something kind of good. And if you've read the comics, it's very exciting. She ends up running into this other boy, and he is part of a group called the Red Daggers, which was kind of a twist on everything. And I thought it was just going to be one person, but no, it's actually like an organization, and they call themselves the Red Daggers. So in the comic books, and I didn't say this earlier because I wanted to kind of correlate, the first time she meets the Red Dagger person, and in the comics obviously they don't tell you that he is the Red Dagger, but you pretty much know that he is. So in the comics, when she arrives to the house and she's in her old mother's bedroom, there's another boy there. His name is Kareem, and that's actually his room. So he ends up moving out of that room to let Kamala stay there, but he doesn't really want to. He's pretty much saying like, why do I have to give up my room for her? I've been here longer, blah, 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 blah. But then she runs into him, and, he's kind of attractive, taller, good looking in the comics, also very good looking in the Disney Plus show. And he's not part of the family, but it's like the cousins, aunts, friend. So it's pretty much a very, very close family friend. He's actually living there while he's doing his studies for like college and stuff like that. And so in the comics, they actually meet, and then in the comics there's actually a group of like vigilantes that are protesting pretty much water. Like they're blowing up fire hydrants, they're blowing up water wells because they want the community to buy water from like specific source. And so that's her first encounter in the comic books of something like that. And she was even saying to herself like, wow, I leave the United States to kind of not deal with any drama or bad guys, and end up going to another part of the world, and it doesn't seem that I can get away from bad people. So she ends up patrolling them, and she ends up stopping the three gentlemen that blew up like the fire hydrant that night. And while she's doing that, this other person appears, and he identifies himself as the Red Dagger. And you can't tell, like I said, for sure, but you later understand that the Red Dagger is actually Kareem. So they end up stopping the three people. They kind of fight him off, and he is kind of upset at Kamala because he's like, well, why did you do that? Like, you didn't have to do it this way. In the comics, the truck blew up, like it fell off a cliff, and then it kind of just made the whole scene bigger than what it should be. So little bit of differences there between the Disney Plus and then the comics, but the way Disney Plus did it was really good, and they had a really good backstory. I do like the comic book a little bit better, just because we kind of know who he is, the Red Dagger, and later on in the comics, I don't want to get too far ahead, but the Red Dagger actually ends up going to Jersey City in the same grade as Kamala, so which was pretty dope. So that's that part for that section, as far as her meeting him in the train station and actually fighting against the Red Daggers using her powers, things like that, versus her in the comic books meeting the Red Dagger at this one exchange when she's fighting off the bad guys. But ultimately, we know that he's actually Kareem in the comic books, which is pretty dope. Later on in the Disney Plus show, we saw at the end of episode 3 that the clandestines, they get captured by damage control. So damage control is, going to take them to their cells, and the clandestines actually end up breaking free. They fight off the guys, and they're escaping the prison. But before they do that, they actually leave Cameron there by himself, because his mother, that's like the leader of the clandestines, is like, he's made his choice, because back in episode 3 he was trying to help Kamala and save her from the stuff that was going to happen at the wedding. So they end up escaping, and however long it takes to get to Pakistan, they got there pretty quickly. I don't know if they can teleport or whatnot, but apparently they got to Pakistan very fast, because later in the TV show, they end up breaking into where the Red Dagger's lair is. And the Red Daggers, they do have this other gentleman who's kind of like the leader. And it only seems that it was the leader and then Kareem that were the members of this Red Dagger society. And they're pretty much trying to save what Kamala has. And they end up saying that if the clandestines were able to get the bracelet, that they can bring their world into the regular world, and that things will get destroyed. So they're definitely trying to protect that type of, they call it a Noor, an Noor, which is kind of like Kamala's powers, where she gets them. So when they actually break into their lair, they have this big fight scene, which is really, really dope. And then from there, it's an even longer fighting scene, because they end up going to the city, and Kamala's, using her powers, driving cars, hitting people. And right at the end of the episode is when we see a huge transition to, I don't even know what yet, and I can only guess. So they're fighting in the streets. Unfortunately, that leader of the Red Daggers apparently dies, but we don't know for sure. He got stabbed in the back twice by Cameron's mom on a higher level, and then he plummets to the ground, and Kamala and Kareem are running, away from the bad people. And that's less we see of him, but I don't think he may be for sure dead. Unless you really see them die on screen, then you don't really know. So he did get stabbed, he did fall off the roof, he wasn't moving, but who knows. So later on, towards right at the last couple minutes of the episode, Kamala and Cameron, they start fighting the last 2-3 people left of the group, and Cameron's mother tries to stab Kamala in the wrist area, here, and when she does that, she opens this time portal thing, which is pretty dope, that we've seen before. Remember when Kamala first put on the bracelet, and she kind of almost was going backwards, and we kind of see her going into this different realm dimension place. And then also when Cameron's mom had touched the bracelet, I think maybe episode 2, we saw another, episode 3, yeah, where I forget if she hit it or something, but then it showed the train coming, and they both saw that vision. So now, when she got stabbed in the wrist on the bracelet, Kamala entered a different dimension. She went back in time to when that Karachi train vision first happened, back in 1945, 1947, something like that. So she ends up landing at the train station, and she's like totally confused. I'm confused too. I don't even know what's going on. But she ends up landing at the train station. She's kind of walking around, things like that. She sees all these people. People are crying. People are sad, depressed. Like, there's just so much crowd. People are on the train, on top of it, like sitting up there. And she sees an empty spot, and she ends up sitting on the train. And then that's kind of where the episode led us, which is kind of weird because I mentioned this before. I forget if it was maybe episode 2 or 3 when I did this, but Kamala actually generates her power from time. So every time she uses her powers, she's grabbing all that power and that energy source from different moments in her timeline. So it's kind of confusing when you talk about time travel, and I'm not too sure exactly how it goes down, but I would assume her getting hit off the bracelet took her back to the beginning of this whole journey with these bracelets and everything like that. Possibly even how her powers generated in the Disney Plus TV show. But at the end of this episode, like I said, she just gets stuck there, and that's the last frame that we see is just her zooming out from Karachi, and that's pretty much it. So, like I said, I would assume that it has to deal with some type of time travel, maybe dimension, or maybe she's fainted mainly, and she'll wake up in the next episode. We have no idea. So I don't want to move too far ahead, just because I've done that before, and then Disney Plus has brought it out. But I do want to say a little bit more of Kareem moving to Jersey City, where he does that in the comic books, and literally right when he arrives, there's a situation that needs to be taken care of. So Kamal leaves the classroom, and it's like a train that doesn't have any brakes, and so she needs to try and stop it. And so while she's doing that, the Red Dagger appears, and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And that's why I'm saying he doesn't really say in the comics that Kareem is the Red Dagger, but like, what's the coincidence of the Red Dagger being in Jersey City right when Kareem shows up? So they end up stopping the train together, and while they're doing that, people are taking like photos and videoing and stuff like that, and instantly the Red Dagger Kareem gets like Instagram famous, like he's all over the internet, everything like that. And Kamala, you kind of see, gets a little bit jealous. So I just want to throw that out there, that Kareem does have a bigger part in the comic books, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Kareem is possibly one of the first boys she actually kisses in the comic books. So definitely it wasn't Bruno in the comic books that she kisses. It was Kareem the Red Dagger. If I'm not mistaken, I'm like almost like 99% sure. So this was a very good episode, like I said in the beginning. I liked how they integrated the Red Dagger into like an actual group. We definitely saw a lot more of Kamala's powers and how she almost instinctively uses them to defend herself, to attack, to run away, to pretty much almost do everything. We see a little bit more of her embiggen, which is her getting like a big fist or really stretchy and, punching it across the room, which is really dope. So yeah, I had a little bit of skepticism when this show first came out. I didn't know it was going to start getting like this, and I'm glad that we saw a little bit more fighting and Kamala using her powers. We still don't really know if there's going to be another villain. All we know right now is that it's the clandestines. So we may never see, the Inventor, Discord, all these other little enemies that she's fought in. And actually at the end of the 2019 series, she does fight Electro. So he ends up moving from like Spider-Man's area, and he ends up going to Jersey City, and that's one of her bigger opponents that she's actually fought in too, which is pretty cool. So my overall thought of this episode has to be like an 8.3 out of 10. It was very well scripted, it was funny, it had action, kind of all around. So I'm very excited to see what the next 2 episodes are going to be, and what they're going to entail. And I'm really still hoping that we get to see Carol at least at an end credits scene, or even a small clip of her like actually meeting Kamala, because that would definitely totally set up the Marvels movies that's going to be coming out in the next year or two, which will be pretty dope. So again, if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and click that subscribe button for me. Also like, comment, and share this video. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you next week for episode 5.